After 13 years as a Navy SEAL, all he wanted was land silence and a fresh start. So when he found 100 acres in Montana selling for just $10, he didn't ask too many questions. But the first night he unlocked the door, he realized something wasn't right. There was someone already inside, a young woman hiding in fear. And what she told him would pull him into a secret involving betrayal, murder, and a fight for justice that no one in that small town wanted reopened. The town of Red Hollow, Montana had a way of disappearing beneath its own sky. In late October, the wind came down from the Absaroka Range sharp and restless, dragging thin sheets of dust across the empty highway like something being erased. The grasslands surrounding the town stretched for miles in dull gold and brittle brown, broken only by skeletal fences and the occasional wind-bent pine leaning away from whatever had hurt it last. By 4 in the afternoon, the temperature had already begun to drop. Clouds hung low and metallic, promising an early frost that would settle into the bones of every living thing, still foolish enough to be outside. It was the kind of place where silence felt permanent, where people minded their own business not out of courtesy, but out of survival, where stories died quickly and those who told them learned to stop. Garrett Holden preferred it that way. He drove into Red Hollow in a dented navy blue pickup that had seen better decades. The engine rattled when idling a low mechanical cough that never quite cleared, but the truck still ran steady, like its owner. Garrett was 36 years old, broad-shouldered and built lean rather than bulky, the kind of strength carved by endurance rather than display. Years of swimming in freezing water, carrying wounded men across open terrain, and surviving on less sleep than most people would believe possible had shaped him into something efficient. Nothing wasted. His dark hair was cut short, military precise, though he hadn't worn the uniform in 18 months. A faint scar ran from the corner of his jaw toward his left ear, half hidden beneath a trimmed but rugged beard that he kept because shaving every morning felt like a discipline he no longer owed anyone. His eyes were gray-blue, steady, the kind that assessed every exit in a room without appearing to look, the kind that noticed which hand a stranger favored, whether weight shifted when someone stood, whether the smile reached the eyes or stopped at the mouth. He had been a Navy SEAL for 13 years, 4 deployments, operations he would never speak about in countries whose names he had trained himself to forget. Combat had shaped him in ways that didn't show on the surface. He moved quietly. He rarely spoke more than necessary. Loud noises made his shoulders tighten before he could stop them, a reflex he had learned to hide but never learned to kill. He slept lightly. He trusted slowly. And some nights the war followed him into rooms where no enemy had ever stood. The war had ended for him 18 months ago. The quiet had not. In the passenger seat sat Briggs. Briggs was a 5-year-old German shepherd, sable-coated with a thick black saddle pattern across his back and tan legs dusted in road dirt from 3 days of driving. His ears stood tall and alert, one slightly nicked at the tip from an old training injury that had healed crooked. His amber eyes were intelligent, watchful, always processing. He had once been part of a military working dog unit trained in detection and tactical support. When Garrett left the service, Briggs left with him. No paperwork could have separated them. No regulation would have survived the attempt. The dog's temperament mirrored his handler, disciplined, calm under pressure, intensely loyal in a way that did not require affection to prove itself. Briggs did not bark unnecessarily. He observed first, assessed second, acted only when the situation demanded it, and when he acted, he did not hesitate. They had been through gunfire together. They had slept in the same dirt, breathed the same dust, bled within feet of each other. That bond did not fade with paperwork or time zones. It lived in the space between them, invisible and unbreakable. Garrett parked outside the small county office building, where faded white letters read, Gallatin County Property Administration. The paint had cracked along the edges of every letter, as though even the name of the place was trying to leave. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. A clerk with reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose barely looked up when Garrett signed the final document transferring ownership of 100 acres of disputed land for $10. The property had been locked in legal limbo for weeks following the death of one of its co-owners. Taxes unpaid, operations halted. The surviving business partner had consolidated assets too quickly for anyone paying attention. But no one in Red Hollow had been paying attention. The land sat abandoned, unwanted, untouched. Garrett wanted it precisely because no one else did. $10 bought him land privacy distance, a place quiet enough that maybe, just maybe, the memories wouldn't follow. He folded the deed into his jacket pocket and walked back to the truck. Briggs watched him through the windshield, ears forward, reading his handler's posture the way most people read faces. By dusk, they were driving through the rusted front gate of Callaway Ranch. The property spread wide and uneven beneath a cold October sky turning violet at the edges. The main house stood weathered but intact. White paint peeled at the corners. Porch boards had gone gray from years of wind and neglect. A red barn leaned slightly to one side in the distance, its doors half open like a mouth caught mid-sentence. Beyond that, rolling pasture disappeared into a dark tree line where the mountains began their slow climb towards snow. Briggs lifted his head before the truck engine fully died. His posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew him. Ears rotated forward, nostrils flared. His body went still in that particular way that meant he was no longer observing the world casually. He was working. Garrett noticed immediately. "What is it?" he murmured. Briggs did not bark. He stared at the house. Garrett stepped out of the truck. His boots crunched on gravel that hadn't been driven over in weeks. The air smelled like dry wood and old hay, and something faintly metallic that might have been rust or might have been memory. No smoke rose from the chimney. No vehicle sat nearby. No movement disturbed the stillness. But Briggs moved ahead first. He approached the porch with his nose low, inhaling deeply along the base of the steps across the threshold into the gap beneath the front door. His muscles were tense now, not aggressive, alert. There was a difference, and Garrett knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat. He unlocked the front door with the key the county clerk had given him. The hinges groaned. The interior smelled of dust and abandonment, and the particular loneliness that settles into a house when no one has laughed inside it for a long time. Furniture remained. A couch with sagging cushions. A wooden table scarred by years of use. A bookshelf missing half its shelves. Faint light filtered through thin curtains that had once been white and were now the color of old teeth. Briggs stepped inside first. He paused in the center of the living room. Head low, ears locked forward. Then came a low growl, not aggressive. Warning. Garrett's body shifted instinctively. Weight balanced, hands open at his sides, every sense sharpening the way they had sharpened 1,000 times before in doorways he had entered, not knowing what waited on the other side. There was someone here. From the far corner of the living room near the cold fireplace where no fire had burned in weeks, a figure flinched. A young woman crouched against the wall, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked like she had been there for days, maybe longer. Her breathing was fast, shallow, the kind of breathing that comes not from exertion but from sustained fear, the kind that lives in the chest like a trapped bird. Garrett did not move closer. He did something that required more discipline than advancing. He stopped. Slowly he removed his gloves and set them on the table. He pulled a wooden chair back from the table, deliberately letting the sound announce his intention. And he sat down. Briggs, understanding the cue with the precision of years of partnership, lowered himself to the floor beside Garrett's boots. His chin rested between his paws. His eyes, however, never left the woman. Calm, watchful, ready but not threatening. "My name's Garrett Holden," he said evenly. His voice was low, controlled. The voice of a man who had learned that volume was almost never the answer. "This is Briggs. He won't hurt you." The woman's breathing hitched once, then steadied by a fraction. She was in her mid-twenties, around 5'6", slender but not frail. There was a quiet endurance in her frame, the kind that came from years of early mornings and physical work, rather than fragility. Her hair was long chestnut brown, falling loosely around her shoulders. Strands stuck to her face as though she had been sweating from fear despite the cold. Her skin was pale from lack of sunlight. Faint freckles crossed the bridge of her nose. Her eyes were green, sharp despite the exhaustion that ringed them with shadow. She wore a faded denim jacket over a gray sweater, jeans dusty at the knees, no shoes. Barefoot on the cold wooden floor. There was a scrape along her left ankle, partly healed, as though she had stumbled running through rough ground in the dark. A pair of worn leather boots sat tucked beneath the kitchen cabinet near the back door, the only belongings she had carried when she fled here weeks ago. She looked like someone who had been living quietly, carefully, invisibly. "You're not with him?" she asked. Her voice trembled slightly, but beneath the trembling there was something harder, something that had not broken despite everything working to break it. Garrett shook his head once. "I bought this place today, $10, county sale." Silence filled the room. The wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance a fence post creaked. Briggs shifted slightly, then rolled onto his side, exposing his belly. It was a gesture of non-threat, deliberate and trained. In a room full of tension, the dog offered the most vulnerable part of himself to a stranger. The woman noticed. Her shoulders lowered by a fraction. Her arms loosened, though they did not fully uncross. "My name is Wren Calloway," she said slowly. She stood cautiously, keeping distance, but she was no longer pressed against the wall. She was no longer trying to disappear. "This ranch used to belong to my family." Garrett did not interrupt. He sat still, hands resting on his knees, and he listened the way he had been trained to listen during intelligence debriefs. Not just to the words, but to the weight behind them, the pauses, the places where the voice thinned or hardened. Wren told him everything. Her father, Emmett Calloway, had co-owned the ranch with a man named Dominic Voss. Emmett was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered with sunbred skin and hands permanently rough from decades of work. He had thick silvering hair and a habit of humming old country songs while mending fence posts in the late afternoon light. He was steady, dependable, the kind of man who kept his word because it never occurred to him not to. He trusted too easily, Wren said, especially those he called friends. Dominic Voss was different, mid-40s, clean-cut, always wore pressed shirts even on the ranch, as though the dust and sweat of honest work were beneath him. He had a smooth smile and a sharp jawline, and the polished confidence of a man who shook hands firmly while calculating profit margins behind his eyes. He handled the business side, contracts, buyers, financial reporting. Emmett handled operations, livestock equipment, land management. "People like Dominic," Wren said quietly. "My father trusted him." 6 weeks before Emmett died, small discrepancies began appearing in the quarterly financial statements. Revenue from cattle shipments that didn't match delivery records, feed invoices that exceeded what the ranch had actually ordered, numbers that looked right at a glance but fell apart under scrutiny. Emmett wasn't an accountant, but he knew the ranch's margins by heart. He had built them with his own hands over 30 years. He knew what 100 head of cattle sold for. He knew what feed cost in October versus March. And the numbers Dominic was presenting didn't match reality. Emmett started keeping his own records, handwritten notebooks filled in by lamplight at the kitchen table after Wren had gone to bed. He compared them line by line to Dominic's digital reports. They didn't match. Emmett confronted Dominic once, casually, over lunch in the ranch office. He kept his voice even, his tone more curious than accusatory, because that was Emmett's way. He didn't want a fight. He wanted an explanation. Dominic dismissed it. Clerical error. Blamed a third-party accounting firm. Smiled that smooth smile and changed the subject. But Emmett wasn't convinced. and that was when he installed the camera. Wren was careful to clarify. It wasn't paranoia, she said. My father wasn't afraid for his life. He just wanted proof. The camera was small, no larger than a matchbox. Emmett had purchased it with the help of Eugene Pratt, a man in his early 60s who ran a small electronics repair shop on the edge of town. Eugene was tall but slightly stooped from decades behind a counter. White hair combed neatly to one side, wire-framed glasses, flannel shirts rolled to mid-forearm regardless of the season. He had served as a communications technician in the Air Force before retiring to Montana, and technology did not intimidate him the way it intimidated most men his age. Eugene helped Emmett select a discrete recording device and showed him how to embed it inside a smoke detector casing mounted on the ceiling of his office. The camera was angled toward the desk and the seating area where meetings were held. It recorded to a micro SD card stored inside the unit. My father wasn't tech-savvy, Wren said with a faint, sad, almost smile. But he wasn't naive either. The camera recorded for several weeks. Most of it was routine. Emmett at his desk, Dominic reviewing paperwork, phone calls, nothing remarkable. Until the night of the explosion. The footage from that evening showed Emmett seated behind his desk wearing his usual work jacket, dark brown canvas, with a torn cuff he never got around to mending. Dominic entered the office dressed unusually formal for the ranch. Button-down shirt, clean boots, no dust on him. He looked like a man who had somewhere else to be. The conversation started tense but controlled. Emmett laid out the discrepancies. Specific numbers, specific dates, cattle sale payments that had been diverted to a separate account Emmett had never authorized. Dominic denied it at first, then deflected. Then his posture changed. He leaned forward across the desk, and his voice dropped into something cold. If you push this, you'll regret it. Wren's hands tightened around themselves as she repeated those words. The footage showed Emmett standing, pointing toward the door, telling Dominic to leave the property. His voice was firm but not raised, the voice of a man drawing a line he expected to be respected. Dominic did not leave immediately. The camera showed him standing alone in the office after Emmett exited. He remained there for nearly 15 minutes. During that time, he opened the desk drawer. He removed a folder. He walked to the wall cabinet where maintenance records and schematics were stored. He took out a laminated blueprint of the generator shed. The generator shed, the building behind the barn where the ranch's backup power system was housed. The building where 67 minutes later, an explosion would kill Emmett Calloway instantly. On camera, Dominic was seen placing something small into his coat pocket. The resolution wasn't high enough to identify the object. Then the footage ended abruptly. The storage card was full, Wren said. The timestamp read 8:40 in the evening. At 9:47, the generator shed exploded. The official report called it mechanical failure, fuel line rupture, accidental ignition. Emmett had reportedly been performing a routine inspection. No one else was present. Officially, Dominic handled everything afterward. The funeral, the insurance paperwork, the asset transfer. All of it completed with a speed that should have raised questions but didn't. Because Dominic was charming and Emmett was dead. And the people of Red Hollow had already decided it was an accident before the ashes had cooled. They said it was an accident, Wren said. Her jaw tightened. The muscles along her neck stood out like wire. But my father knew that generator better than anyone alive. He maintained it every single week. He would never have ignored a leak. Garrett studied her carefully. No hysteria, no exaggeration, no performance. Just conviction held together by grief and the kind of anger that sharpens rather than blinds. Why are you hiding here? He asked. Wren hesitated, not from uncertainty but from the weight of what came next. Because I told Dominic I didn't believe it was an accident. The room grew colder, or perhaps it only felt that way. He looked at me, she continued, and said grief makes people imagine things. Her eyes hardened into something that could cut glass. 2 nights later, someone followed me home. I saw headlights behind me on the county road. They matched every turn I made. When I pulled into my driveway, they stopped at the end of the road and sat there with the engine running for 20 minutes. Briggs lifted his head slightly at the change in her tone. The next night it happened again. Different vehicle, same pattern. So I came here, she said, before everything was legally transferred, before Dominic locked it all down. I parked my truck behind the old grain silo where the brush grows thick enough to hide it from the road. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, if I waited, I could figure out what to do. Her voice faltered for the first time, not from weakness, but from the exhaustion of carrying fear alone for weeks. I haven't been able to get the camera footage, she said. Dominic changed the locks on the office building. I couldn't get back in. Garrett leaned back slightly in the chair, not relaxed, grounded. His gray-blue eyes held hers without blinking. The wind rattled the window panes. I don't think my father died in an accident, Wren said. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room entirely. I think Dominic killed him. Silence settled between them like something with weight. Briggs rose slowly from the floor and walked toward Wren. He stopped a few feet away and sat, calm, patient, his amber eyes watching her face with an intelligence that felt almost human. Wren looked down at the dog. After a long moment, she extended a cautious hand. Briggs sniffed once, then nudged gently against her fingers, pressing his muzzle into her palm. The tension in her shoulders eased for the first time since Garrett had walked through the door. Garrett watched the exchange carefully. Briggs did not offer trust easily. He had growled at commanding officers. He had refused affection from people whose intentions were unclear. But he had walked to this woman on his own. He had offered comfort without being asked. In 13 years of working with the dog, Garrett had learned to trust that instinct more than his own. If that SD card is still in the smoke detector, Garrett said evenly, it's evidence. Wren looked up from Briggs. I know, but I can't get to it. And even if I could, I don't know what good it does. The office is on property Dominic controls now. Going in there is trespassing. I've done worse things for worse reasons, Garrett said. His tone wasn't proud, just factual. The voice of a man stating his coordinates. Wren studied him in the dim light, the scar along his jaw, the stillness in his body that wasn't relaxation, but readiness, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he was thinking. I don't need someone to rescue me, she said carefully. I need someone to watch my back while I go in and get it myself. Garrett blinked once. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. He had heard that tone before, in briefing rooms and forward operating bases from people who had already decided what they were going to do and simply needed the right person beside them to do it. You know the layout, he said. It wasn't a question. I grew up on this ranch. I know every door, every window, every blind spot on that property. Dominic has people watching it. I saw tire tracks near the gravel drive this afternoon. Fresh cigarette butts along the fence line. Someone's been on patrol. Wren nodded slowly. He's not careless. Neither am I. A pause stretched between them. Briggs remained at Wren's side, leaning gently against her leg. Tomorrow, Garrett said. We move tomorrow night. I'll teach you how we approach. You tell me what's inside. Wren held his gaze. For the first time since her father's death, she did not feel like prey. She felt like someone who had finally stopped running. Outside, the Montana wind swept across the empty pasture, carrying the first true bite of winter with it. Inside the old ranch house, under a dim ceiling light, and a sky heavy with coming frost, 3 lives had collided. A soldier looking for silence. a daughter looking for justice, and a dog who trusted her before either of them had decided to trust each other. The truth about Emmett Calloway's death had only begun to surface, and the woman who would drag it into the light was already planning her next move. The wind did not ease that night. It pressed against the ranch house in long, restless gusts, slipping through cracks in the old window frames and carrying the scent of frost across the fields. Inside, Garrett had started a small fire in the stone fireplace. The flames cast shifting shadows across the worn wooden floorboards, and the warmth spread slowly through the room, like something reluctant to commit. Wren sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a sheet of paper she had found in a drawer. She was drawing a map, not a rough sketch, but a precise layout of the ranch office building. The equipment shed, the generator ruins, the fence lines, the tree coverage on the western approach. She drew from memory the way other people breathe, without effort, without doubt. Garrett stood behind her, arms crossed, watching her hand move. "Security camera on the northeast corner of the equipment shed," she said, tapping the pencil against a spot on the paper. "But it's been broken since last spring. My father reported it to Dominic 3 times. Never got fixed." "Convenient," Garrett said. "The office has 2 entries. Front door faces the gravel drive, visible from the main road. Back door opens toward the tree line. That's our way in." She paused. "There's a window on the east side, old frame, warped from weather. It never locked properly. My father used to joke that it was the ranch's worst-kept secret." Garrett leaned closer to the map. His eyes traced the distances. Tree line to office. 60 yards of open ground on the western approach. Wind direction at night in late October would carry their scent away from the property if they came from the west. "The guards," he said. "I don't know how many, but Dominic wouldn't trust more than 2. He's careful about who knows what." Garrett nodded once. He spent the next hour teaching Wren how to move through open terrain at night, how to stay low without sacrificing speed, how to read wind direction by watching grass movement, how to control breathing so that exertion wouldn't produce visible vapor in cold air. Wren listened with the focus of someone whose life depended on it, because it did. Briggs lay near the doorway, positioned where he could see both the front entrance and the hallway, a habit born from training, not comfort. His ears twitched occasionally at sounds outside, cataloging them, dismissing them, remaining vigilant. By 10 the following evening, the sky over the ranch had turned iron gray. A storm was building beyond the mountain ridge. No thunder yet, but the air felt heavy, electric charged with something that hadn't decided what it wanted to become. They moved out at 11. Garrett wore dark jeans, a charcoal thermal, and a worn field jacket from his service years. No insignia remained on it. Wren had changed into dark clothing Garrett had found in the truck. A black thermal, 2 sizes too large for her, tucked into her jeans and cinched with a belt. She had pulled on her worn leather boots from beneath the kitchen cabinet and laced them tight. Her hair was pulled back. Her jaw was set. Briggs walked between them, alert but steady. His black saddle coat made him nearly invisible against the dark ground. They followed the tree line west, staying low. The grass was brittle and dry, whispering against their legs as they moved. Garrett led the first stretch, then stepped aside and let Wren take point as they neared the property boundary. She knew this land. Every dip in the terrain, every gap in the fence, every shadow that moved differently from the others. Halfway across the final stretch of open pasture, Briggs froze. Garrett stopped instantly. Wren saw his hand go up and drop to a crouch without being told. Briggs lowered his head and gave a soft huff through his nose. Movement ahead. A figure stepped out from the shadow near the equipment shed. Large, well over 6 feet, with a heavy build that came from years of physical labor rather than discipline. He carried a flashlight and wore a thick brown jacket over flannel. His beard was full and untrimmed, streaked with gray. A trucker cap sat low on his head. Holt Drennan, 48 years old, former oil field worker, divorced, financially desperate, loyal to whoever signed his paycheck. Holt walked with a slow, deliberate pace, sweeping his flashlight across fence posts and ground edges. Professional enough to be thorough, predictable enough to be timed. Garrett counted the intervals between sweeps. 45 seconds facing east, turn. 60 seconds facing south, turn. The pattern repeated without variation. He leaned close to Wren's ear. When he turned south, you go, straight to the east window. Wren nodded. Her breathing was controlled, steady. Whatever fear lived inside her had been compressed into something dense and functional. She was not fearless. She was afraid and moving anyway. Holt turned south. His flashlight beam swung away from the office. Wren ran, low, fast, silent across the frozen ground. She reached the office wall and pressed her back flat against the wood. Her fingers found the warped window frame. She tested it. The wood groaned softly, then gave. She slid the window open inch by inch, the sound swallowed by the rising wind. Garrett remained in the grass with Briggs watching the perimeter. His eyes tracked Holt's movement. A second figure appeared near the driveway, younger, thinner, restless energy in his stride. Short blonde hair shaved close at the sides. He carried a radio on his belt. Keegan Farris, mid-20s, former high school athlete who never left town. The kind of man who acted first and thought about it later, if he thought about it at all. 2 guards, just as Wren had predicted. Inside the office, the air smelled stale. Wren moved through the darkness with the certainty of someone navigating her childhood home, which in many ways she was. Her father's desk stood near the center. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A corkboard with faded ranch maps hung above a side table. Everything untouched. Everything exactly as Dominic had left it when he shut operations down and walked away with everything that mattered. Wren looked up. The smoke detector was still mounted to the ceiling. Yellowed plastic, ordinary, invisible. She positioned a chair beneath it quietly and climbed up. Her fingers found the casing. She twisted carefully, holding her breath as the plastic creaked. The unit detached. She lowered it and opened the casing with her fingernails prying apart the seam. The micro SD card was still inside, small as a fingernail, untouched. Wren exhaled slowly. She slid the card into the breast pocket of the oversized thermal and buttoned it shut. The empty camera housing went back into place. No sign of tampering. Then through the window she heard Briggs growl. Not loud, controlled, deliberate. The sound a trained animal makes when the situation has changed and changed quickly. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside the office. Holt's voice muttered close now. Thought I heard something. A flashlight beam cut across the window frame. Wren dropped below the sill. Her heart hammered against the SD card in her pocket, as though her body understood what she was carrying better than her mind did. She moved toward the back door, eased it open. The hinge gave a small creak no louder than a branch bending in wind, but in the silence of that Montana night it carried. There, Holt shouted. Wren ran. She broke from the back door toward the tree line, 60 yards of open ground between her and cover. Behind her, Holt's boots pounded gravel. His flashlight beam swept wildly, catching her shadow as she sprinted. From the driveway, Keegan's voice crackled through the radio. Movement at the office heading west. Garrett was already moving. He broke from his position and ran a parallel line 30 yards to Wren's left, deliberately crashing through dry brush. The sound split. Holt's flashlight swung toward the heavier noise. He changed direction, pursuing the louder target. Keegan hesitated at the fork between 2 shadows, then chose Wren's direction. He was fast, younger, lighter on his feet. The gap between them closed rapidly across the frozen pasture. Then Briggs appeared. The dog materialized from the darkness like something the night itself had produced. He did not charge. He did not bite. He planted himself directly in Keegan's path and stood, every muscle locked, head low, teeth barely visible, and released a growl that came from somewhere deeper than his chest. It came from years of training, from the memory of men with weapons, from the absolute certainty that the person behind him would not be touched. Keegan stumbled to a halt. His hand went to the radio, his eyes went wide. The dog did not advance. He did not need to. His presence alone was a locked door. Wren reached the tree line. Branches whipped against her arms. She found the shallow creek bed Garrett had mapped the day before and stepped into the icy water without hesitation. The cold hit her ankles like a blade, but she kept moving, using the stream to break her scent trail and obscure her tracks. A technique Garrett had taught her by the fireplace less than 24 hours ago. Behind her, Briggs held position for 3 more seconds, then turned and vanished into the darkness. He circled wide in a practiced arc, silent as smoke, and rejoined Wren at the creek bed within minutes. Garrett appeared from the opposite bank moments later. He had led Holt deep into the tree line before doubling back, using terrain rather than speed. The three of them moved through the darkness together. The storm wind rose, branches whipped overhead, leaves scattered in spirals. Within minutes, the forest was alive with sound, and 3 sets of footprints disappeared into noise and weather and water. By the time they reached the outer boundary of the ranch, no voices followed. No flashlights flickered between the trees. Garrett crouched beside a fallen log, listening. Nothing but wind. Briggs pressed lightly against Wren's leg. She reached down and rested her hand on the dog's neck. He was warm, solid, real. "You did good," she whispered. They returned to the ranch house just as the first drops of cold rain began to fall. Inside, Wren pulled the SD card from her pocket and set it on the kitchen table. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. From the particular electricity that runs through the body when something that was lost has been recovered. When proof exists where before there was only belief. The storm broke overhead. Thunder rolled across the Montana plains in long, shuddering waves. Garrett connected the card reader to his laptop. The screen flickered. Video files appeared, time-stamped, dated. He looked at Wren. She sat down across from him and nodded once. He clicked the most recent file. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The office interior appeared, the desk, the wall cabinet. Emmett Calloway entered the frame first. Broad shoulders, graying hair, his movements calm but visibly strained, the posture of a man carrying knowledge he wished he didn't have. Dominic Voss entered moments later. Even on camera, his confidence was unmistakable. The controlled expression of a man accustomed to winning conversations before they began. The argument unfolded exactly as Wren had described. Voices sharp, words cutting, Dominic's hand striking the desk surface once hard. "If you go to the bank with this, you'll regret it." The words came through the laptop speakers, thin and distorted but unmistakable. Wren inhaled sharply at the sound of her father's voice, not at the threat, at the sound of a man who no longer existed, speaking in a room that no longer held him. The footage showed Emmett standing, pointing toward the door, his voice firm and final. Then Emmett exited the frame. Dominic remained. He stood alone in the office for nearly 15 minutes. He opened the desk drawer, removed a folder, walked to the wall cabinet, took out the laminated blueprint of the generator shed. He placed something small into his coat pocket. He stood motionless for several long seconds, staring at the door Emmett had walked through. Then the video ended. Wren covered her mouth with one hand. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She would not give this moment tears, not yet. "That's enough," she whispered. "It's not proof of murder," Garrett said evenly. "But its intent, threat, preparation, its motive on camera." He closed the laptop gently. "We need law enforcement," he said. Wren stiffened. "The sheriff, Dalton Pruitt." She paused, and something complicated moved across her face. "My father wrote something in his notebook about Pruitt." What did he write? "That Pruitt accepted campaign contributions from Dominic's company, twice." The room went quiet. Rain hammered the roof. Briggs shifted beneath the table, his chin resting on Garrett's boot. "Do you trust him?" Garrett asked. I don't know, Wren said, but I'm going to find out. The next morning, Wren drove her truck from behind the grain silo where it had been hidden for weeks and headed to the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office alone. Garrett offered to go with her. She declined. Sheriff Dalton Pruitt was 52 years old, tall and lean with a face carved by 2 decades of Montana's sun. His skin was weathered lines cut deep at the corners of his eyes. He wore a gray Stetson and a tan uniform jacket slightly worn at the elbows. His silver mustache was trimmed with the precision of a man who believed in small disciplines. He had been sheriff for 12 years, a widower for 5. He carried a quiet patience and a moral steadiness that the people of Gallatin County had voted for 3 times. He watched the footage without interrupting. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. That's motive, he said. Yes, Wren replied. And I need to know something before we go any further. Pruitt looked at her. My father wrote in his notebook that you accepted money from Dominic's company, campaign contributions. Is that true? The silence in the office lasted 4 seconds. They felt much longer. Pruitt removed his hat and set it on the desk. It's true, 2 donations, legal, reported. I never did a single thing in return for them, and I never would. Then prove it, Wren said. Reopen the case. Bring someone in who can examine that generator shed properly. And don't tell anyone outside this office what's on that card. Pruitt studied the young woman sitting across from him. The green eyes that did not waver, the steady hands, the jaw set exactly the way her father's had been set the last time Pruitt had seen him alive. I'll call in a forensic investigator today, he said. Detective Shay Coltrane. She's out of Helena, best in the state. Within 48 hours, Coltrane arrived. Late 30s, medium height, compact build. Dark blonde hair pulled into a low knot. A thin scar crossed her left eyebrow from a traffic stop that had gone wrong years earlier. She spoke carefully, choosing words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. She was methodical, detail-oriented, and entirely unimpressed by charm money or local politics. Standing in the debris field of the ruined generator shed, she crouched beside a bent metal valve and ran her gloved fingers along the fracture line. This wasn't random failure, she said. She pointed to markings on the metal. See these tool marks, manual adjustment, pressure override. This valve was partially loosened before ignition. Pruitt frowned. You're saying someone tampered with it? Coltrane looked up at him with the flat certainty of someone who did not deal in opinion. I'm saying this didn't fail on its own. Lab results confirmed her assessment within the week. Residue patterns inconsistent with accidental mechanical failure. Ignition source deliberate. The pressure valve had been loosened with a standard wrench prior to the explosion. Meanwhile, financial investigators reviewed the ranch accounts. The discrepancies surfaced immediately. Funds diverted to shell accounts. Unauthorized transfers bearing Dominic Voss's signature on documents Emmett had specifically disputed weeks before his death. Then Dominic made his move. He hired a lawyer named Victor Hale, a man in his 50s with silver temples and the sharp, unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades protecting wealthy men from consequences. Hale filed a motion challenging the legality of the property transfer, claiming Wren had no standing to occupy the ranch. Simultaneously, Dominic began a quiet campaign through the town. Whispers at the diner, comments at the feed store. The grieving daughter had lost her mind. She was making accusations against a respected businessman. She was unstable, dangerous even. Wren heard the whispers. She felt the looks in town, the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store. It hurt more than she expected, but she did not stop. One night, just past midnight, Briggs erupted from sleep with a bark that split the silence like a gunshot. Garrett was on his feet in 2 seconds. Wren reached the window first. Orange light flickered at the edge of the property. The small livestock shelter near the south fence was burning. Flames climbed the dry timber walls and reached for the sky. Wren did not wait. She grabbed her father's old work coat and ran outside into the freezing air. Garrett followed. They reached the shelter and pulled the panicked animals free, working in the heat and smoke until every last one was accounted for. Briggs circled the perimeter, barking once sharp and commanding, driving a stray calf back towards safety. As the flames died down, Wren noticed bootprints in the mud, fresh, leading away from the shelter toward the county road. She pulled out her phone and called Pruitt directly. "Keegan Ferris," she said. Her voice was hoarse from smoke but steady as iron. "He set this fire on Dominic's orders. I want arson added to the charges, and I want witness intimidation on the record." There was no trembling in her voice now, no hesitation. The woman who had crouched in a dark corner weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone who had decided that fear was no longer a factor in her decisions. "I want him arrested," she said. "Tonight." Pruitt was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. Then he said, "I'll have deputies at his property within the hour." Wren hung up. She stood in the cold smoke still rising behind her. Briggs pressed against her leg, and she looked out across the dark pasture toward the mountains she had known her entire life. She was not running anymore. She was not hiding. She was the one coming for him now. The deputies reached Dominic Voss's residence just after sunset the following day. The sky behind the mountains had turned the color of a bruised deep purple bleeding into black at the edges, and the last thin line of gold along the horizon was disappearing like a promise being broken. Dominic stood on his front porch wearing a pressed navy sweater and dark jeans, hands resting in his pockets, as though he had been expecting company. His posture was composed. His jaw was clean. His dark hair was combed with the same careful precision he brought to everything the appearance of control, even as control was being taken from him. Wren had driven to the arrest with Sheriff Pruitt. She stood beside the patrol vehicle, arms folded against the cold brick sitting at her feet. She had not been asked to come. She had not been invited. She had simply gotten into the passenger seat, and Pruitt had not told her to leave. Pruitt stepped onto the porch. His voice was calm and official, and carried the weight of a man who had spent 30 years wearing a badge and understood what it meant. "Dominic Voss, you're under arrest for the murder of Emmett Calloway, destruction of property and financial fraud." For the first time, something moved behind Dominic's eyes. Not fear, something sharper. Anger compressed into a single flash that came and went like heat lightning. "You don't have proof," he said. "We have enough." Handcuffs clicked into place. The sound was small and metallic and final, like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken too long to write. Dominic did not resist. He stepped down from the porch with the measured stride of a man who believed this was temporary, that lawyers and money and the right phone calls would undo what was being done to him. But as the deputies guided him toward the patrol car, he turned his head and looked directly at Wren. His expression was unreadable at first. Then the corner of his mouth shifted into something that was not quite a smile. "Your father wasn't as perfect as you think he was," he said. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Wren did not respond. She did not flinch. But something behind her eyes registered the impact, absorbed it, filed it away in the place where things that hurt are stored, until they can be examined in private. The patrol car doors closed. The vehicle pulled away down the gravel road, tail lights shrinking into red points that eventually disappeared into the darkness. Wren stood motionless for a long time after the car was gone. Briggs pressed his weight gently against her leg. The wind moved through the grass around them. "He's trying to rattle you," Garrett said from behind her. His voice was quiet, factual, not reassuring because false reassurance would have insulted her intelligence. Just honest. "I know," Wren said, "but that doesn't mean he's lying." She returned to the ranch house that night and did something she had been avoiding since her father's death. She opened the box of Emmett's personal belongings she had managed to take from the house before Dominic locked everything down. Inside were clothes that still smelled faintly of hay and engine oil, a pocket knife with a worn handle, reading glasses with one bent arm, and 3 handwritten notebooks. Wren sat on the floor beside the fireplace with Briggs curled at her side and read through every page. Most of it confirmed what she already knew. Financial records, dates, calculations done in her father's careful, unhurried handwriting. But in the second notebook near the middle, she found entries she had never seen before. Emmett had written about the early days of the partnership, the first year, the optimism, the handshake agreements that preceded formal contracts. And there, in blue ink that had faded slightly with time, was an entry dated 18 months before his death. He had signed a document authorizing a land lease arrangement that funneled revenue through a subsidiary account Dominic had created. At the time Emmett wrote, he hadn't understood the full structure. Dominic had explained it as a tax efficiency measure. Emmett had trusted him. He had signed without reading every line. It was only later, months later, that Emmett realized the subsidiary account was being used to divert funds, not just from the lease, but from cattle sales, equipment purchases, insurance claims. The document Emmett had signed gave Dominic the legal framework to build the entire fraud upon. Emmett had written one line beneath the entry, underlined twice. "I made a mistake. I'm going to fix it." Wren closed the notebook. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with something heavier than air. Her father had not been perfect. He had been trusting when he should have been cautious. He had signed something he shouldn't have signed. He had made the mistake that Dominic later weaponized into a machine designed to steal everything the Calloway family had built. But Emmett had also been the man who recognized the mistake, who kept records, who installed a camera, who confronted his partner face to face and said, "This ends now." He had tried to make it right, and he had been killed for trying. Wren pressed her palm flat against the notebook's cover. Briggs lifted his head and watched her face with amber eyes that reflected the firelight. "My father made a mistake," she said to the empty room, "and then he tried to fix it. That's why he's dead, and that's why I'm still standing here." She did not cry. She placed the notebook back in the box, closed the lid, and went to bed. In the morning, she told Garrett everything she had found. He listened without interrupting, as he always did. "Does it change anything?" he asked. "It changes how I see my father," she said. "It doesn't change what Dominic did." Winter arrived the way it always arrives in Montana. Not gradually, but suddenly, as though someone had drawn a curtain across the sky and forgotten to open it again. The first blizzard struck before Thanksgiving. Snow fell soft and manageable in the afternoon, then turned violent by nightfall. Wind erased the fence lines. The gravel drive vanished beneath white drifts that grew by the hour. The barn roof groaned under the weight of accumulating snow. The cattle shifted nervously inside, pressing against each other for warmth. Wren stood near the window, anxiety written across her features. "We don't have enough feed stored. Dad always kept an extra month of supply. Dominic's financial sabotage left the orders incomplete." She pulled on her father's old work coat, the dark brown canvas one with the torn cuff, and walked out into the storm. Garrett followed. Briggs was already ahead of them both. Outside visibility dropped to almost nothing. Wren moved with the certainty of someone who had walked this land in every season of her life. Garrett had tied a rope around his waist, anchored to the porch railing, a technique from Arctic survival training. Wren had not needed the rope. She navigated by memory and by the feel of the ground beneath her boots. They reached the barn and forced the doors open against the wind. Inside, Wren worked steadily, redistributing hay-checking water lines, reinforcing the support beams that groaned under the snow's weight. When a young calf panicked and broke toward the open door, Briggs responded, instantly positioning his body to guide the animal back without barking or startling the others. Controlled herding, instinct refined by training. By dawn, the storm had eased. The ranch still stood. The financial crisis surfaced next. Wren drove to the county bank and sat across from Judith Langford, the regional loan officer. Judith was in her late 40s, tall and composed with straight blonde hair cut precisely at shoulder length. She wore tailored blazers even in small-town Montana and spoke with the careful firmness of someone who had learned long ago that sympathy did not pay debts. She had lost her own family's farm to drought and default when she was young. Structure, not sentiment, was what she believed in. "You're inheriting more than land," Judith said. "There's outstanding debt from operational losses. Taxes were delayed during the legal freeze." Wren looked at the number on the paper Judith slid across the desk. It was heavy, the kind of number that makes a person reconsider everything. "We can restructure," Judith continued, "but income must resume within 90 days. Wren did not look at Garrett, who sat beside her in silence. She did not ask for his help. She leaned forward and began outlining a plan. Which pastures could support early spring grazing? Which livestock could be sold strategically without depleting the herd's long-term value? Which repairs were essential and which could wait? She spoke with the detailed knowledge of someone who had watched her father manage this ranch for 20 years and had absorbed every lesson without realizing it. Judith studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'll submit the restructuring proposal." December came dark and cold. One night, Garrett woke abruptly. His breathing was ragged, the ceiling above him blurred and reformed into something else. Sand-colored walls, the crack of gunfire that was only wind against the window frame. His hands gripped the sheets as his body tried to fight an enemy that existed only in memory. Before the panic could deepen, Briggs was there. The dog climbed onto the mattress and pressed his full weight against Garrett's chest. Warm, solid, 70 pounds of reality anchoring him to the present moment. Garrett placed his hand against the dog's thick fur and held on. "Just wind," he whispered hoarsely. "Just wind." Briggs remained until his handler's breathing steadied, until the trembling stopped, until the room became a room again and not a memory. Across the hall, Wren heard the movement through the thin walls. She did not open the door. She did not ask questions. In the morning, she simply placed a mug of coffee on the table beside him and sat down to review feed schedules as though nothing had happened. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in years. January brought the wolves. Tracks appeared, first large and deliberate, pressed into the snow near the outer pasture fence. Briggs noticed before anyone else his posture changing during the afternoon livestock check, head high, nose testing the air repeatedly. At dusk, howls rolled across the frozen plains, distant at first, then closer. Near midnight, Briggs growled low and steady from his position by the door. Two gray shapes materialized through the drifting snow, moving along the fence line with the patient intelligence of apex predators who had all the time in the world. Wren stood at the window with a lantern. Garrett loaded the rifle, not to kill, to deter. Briggs moved along the fence line, barking once sharp and commanding, a sound that carried authority across the frozen field. The wolves paused, considered, then retreated into the darkness from which they had come. The livestock remained unharmed. Briggs returned with snow clinging to his muzzle, his amber eyes calm and certain. Wren knelt and wrapped her arms briefly around his thick neck. She pressed her forehead against his fur and stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her own. February brought a different danger. Wren had been using the old storm cellar beneath the ranch house to store emergency supplies. One evening, as she descended the narrow steps with a lantern, Briggs followed, but stopped halfway down. He began pawing at the doorframe and whining a sharp, insistent sound, entirely unlike his usual controlled silence. Wren paused. Garrett appeared at the top of the stairs immediately. He knelt near the cellar entrance and inhaled. Faint but unmistakable. Gas. A small propane line feeding the backup heater had developed a leak somewhere in the darkness below. Had Wren continued down those steps with an open flame, the ignition would have been immediate. Garrett shut off the valve. They ventilated the space together, working side by side in the cold until the air cleared. Briggs remained tense at the top of the stairs, refusing to move until his nose confirmed what his instincts already knew. The danger had passed. It was not dramatic. There was no explosion, no chase, no confrontation. Just a dog who stopped a woman on a staircase because he smelled something she could not, and a life that continued because of it. March arrived slowly, the way healing always does. The snow receded in uneven patches, revealing ground that had been buried for months. Brown earth, dormant grass, the first fragile suggestion that warmth was not a memory, but a promise. One afternoon, a truck Wren did not recognize pulled up to the ranch gate. Briggs stood alert at the porch. Garrett positioned himself near the door. Holt Drennan stepped out. He looked different from the man who had chased shadows with a flashlight months earlier. Smaller somehow. His broad shoulders curved inward. His full gray-streaked beard was trimmed shorter. He held his trucker cap in both hands, turning it slowly. He did not look at Garrett. He looked at Wren. "I need to talk to you," he said. His voice was rough and low, and carried the weight of something that had been sitting on his chest for months. Wren stood on the porch with her arms folded. She did not invite him inside. She waited. "The night your father died." Holt began. He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I was on watch, same as always. But that night I saw Dominic's truck parked behind the equipment shed, around 9 o'clock. He wasn't supposed to be there. I saw him walk from the shed toward the generator building. He was carrying something. 15 minutes later, I heard the explosion." The silence between them was absolute. "I didn't say anything," Holt continued. His voice cracked at the edges. "I needed the job. I was broke, divorced. Dominic was the only one paying me steady. So I kept my mouth shut and told myself it wasn't my business." He looked at Wren directly. His eyes were wet. "But you didn't keep your mouth shut. You didn't stop. You could have run. You could have let it go. But you're just like your father. You wouldn't quit." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. A handwritten statement, dated, signed. "I'll testify," he said. "Whatever court, whatever it takes. I should have done this months ago." Wren took the paper. She read it once slowly. Then she looked up at Holt Drennan, the man who had chased her through the darkness, who had worked for the man who killed her father, who had stood guard over injustice because the pay was steady. "Thank you," she said, nothing more. But the two words carried everything. Holt nodded once. He put his cap back on, returned to his truck, and drove away down the gravel road without looking back. Wren stood holding the statement as the March wind moved through her hair. Briggs leaned against her leg. Garrett stood in the doorway behind her. The evidence was complete. Footage, forensics, financial records, and now an eyewitness who had watched Dominic Voss walk toward the building that would become Emmett Calloway's grave. Spring deepened. The fields turned green in slow, uneven waves. Creeks swelled with snowmelt. The mountains released their white burden, gradually revealing dark rock and pine forests that had waited all winter to breathe. The official transfer papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Wren stood at the kitchen table holding the finalized deed. Her name printed clearly as sole owner. Her fingers traced the ink as though confirming it was real. For the first time since her father's death, the land was legally hers. Garrett had already packed half his belongings into the truck. The plan had always been simple. Help her find justice. Leave. He was a man who passed through places. That was what he knew. That was what he had always done. He stepped onto the porch, where Wren stood watching the afternoon light spread across the thawing pasture. Briggs trotted ahead of them, both inspecting fence posts with the serious attention of a foreman conducting his daily rounds. "I was going to leave after the transfer," Garrett said quietly. "I know," Wren said. She did not turn to look at him. A long silence passed, the kind that exists between two people who have survived something together and do not need to fill the space with noise. I haven't slept through the night in years, Garrett said. Not since I left the service. Not in any motel or apartment or borrowed room in 18 months of moving. He paused. Not until here. Wren turned toward him. Her green eyes were clear, steady. The same eyes that had stared at him from a dark corner on a cold October night, full of fear but refusing to break. I don't need saving, she said gently. But I could use a partner. The words settled between them like something planted. Not dependency, not rescue, partnership. Two people who had earned each other's trust through shared winter and shared silence and the kind of honesty that most people never risk. Garrett looked across the pasture, where Briggs had stopped to watch a hawk circling high above the tree line. The dog's ears were forward. His tail moved in slow, contented arcs. He looked like an animal who had finally found the perimeter he was meant to guard. "All right," Garrett said. Two words, ordinary as dirt, but they changed the shape of everything. The wind across Callaway Ranch no longer felt hostile. It felt like something to work with, something that carried the scent of new grass and wet earth, and the slow, patient warmth of a season that had waited all winter to arrive. The $10 ranch had become more than disputed land. It was a place where justice had been restored by a daughter who refused to let her father's death become just another accident in a small town that preferred silence. A place where winter had tested resolve and found it unbreakable. A place where a soldier who had spent 18 months running from himself found a reason to stop, and where slowly, carefully, in the way that all real things grow, a family began to take shape. Not built on romance or rescue, built on truth, on endurance, on the quiet understanding that some people are meant to stand beside you in the storm, and the wisdom to recognize them when they arrive. Somewhere beyond the pasture, a meadowlark sang. Briggs lifted his head to listen. Wren rested her hand on the porch railing her father had built with his own hands 30 years ago. Garrett stood beside her, steady and still, a man who had finally found the thing he didn't know he was looking for. The land stretched out before them, wide and green, and full of work that needed doing. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough.